Welcome to Eye on Horror, the official podcast of iHorror.com. This is episode 108, otherwise known as season 6, episode 9. I am your host, James J. Edwards, and with me, as always, is your other host, Jacob Davison. How you doing, Jacob?
Doing fine. Good to be back.
Cool. And also with us yet again, as always, is your other host, John Correia. How you doing, Correia?
Doing great. A little distracted because I found my hot dog fingers that I bought for everything everywhere all at once. And they're still in the box, but they're just like in the corner here. And right when you said, how you doing? That's what I was staring at, was just hot dog fingers. So
someday you'll make good use of them.
Yeah.
I was thrown off a bit because usually we get a little bit of a blurb from Jacob, but he's like, oh, I'm doing great. Looking forward to this.
I mean, I'm saving it for the main conversation.
He's building anticipation, right?
He's ready to dive in, is what it is. He's like, none of this chit chat. Let's get right to the episode.
Jacob's got shit on the griddle and he's ready to throw it down.
Okay, then let's throw it down. What's been going on this week?
Okay, over the weekend, I went to the New Beverly Halloween Horrors Marathon. They decided to do kind of a summer-ween thing.
Ooh.
For Gravity Falls fans out there. So yeah, they did 4 Halloween horror movies. We didn't know what to expect. It was all a mystery until we saw them, all in 35 millimeter. Do you guys want to hanker a guess what they were?
I mean, I saw your tweet, so I know what they were.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
fair
we
enough.
cheated.
All right, well, yeah, so it was Night of the Demons, Idle Hands, Hack-O-Lantern, and Trick or Treat. Not Trick or Treat, which I still need to see, but still Trick or Treat is always a blast to see on a big screen with a crowd.
As a little heavy metal child of the 80s, Trick or Treat is awesome. So you definitely do need to see that. I was kind of hoping that they would show Satan's Little Helper in there.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that too. It's been a long time since I've watched it and I've never seen it theatrically. But yeah, no, it was a great selection, and I was glad they showed Night of the Demons because I feel like that's a very underrated Halloween horror movie. Basically, Evil Dead, but Halloween, and with a bunch of stupid. I think I can't tell. Are they supposed to be like high schoolers or college kids? I don't know. Youths, general use,
just youths.
I think they're supposed to be high schoolers, but they're all way older.
Oh yeah, yeah, and also Linnea Quigley standing out as always. Like, you know, she has some good bits. Like there's that whole "Run, Judy, run, see Judy, run."
That's the movie with the legendary lipstick scene.
No, that lipstick scene. Yeah, that got a reaction out of the crowd. And Hack-O-Lantern is just kind of a fun Halloween horror movie, and also technically a heavy metal Halloween horror movie because I feel like they had to pad a lot of it because there's that whole scene where like the dude has the dream sequence where he's in the music video for The Devil's Song, with like the demoness, and it still blows my mind because I have to be reminded every time that the guy who plays the lead killer in Hack-O-Lantern is the same guy that plays Mac's dad on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh,
yeah,
that's cool as fuck.
Yeah, and also he played the hitman in Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge.
That's right, he did. Yeah, I remember seeing that and going, I recognize those eyes.
Piercing eyes. Yeah, that's Gregory Scott Cummins.
Man, I'm just upset that I missed Idle Hands on 35 with the crowd.
Oh yeah, got to talk about Idle Hands.
Oh god, I fucking love that movie.
Yeah, no, it is peak late 90s horror comedy, and Devon Sawa puts a Bruce Campbell-esque performance at, you know, having his demonic hand going around killing people.
So good.
It's just a fun movie.
It's so good.
This past week has been super busy for me, but not a whole lot on the horror front. There's been some horror adjacent stuff. Like I saw The Flash. Did either of you guys get to The Flash?
Nah.
The
thing is, the Flash, I enjoyed it. I think I would have enjoyed it more if it wasn't pretty much what Marvel was doing right now with both the Spider-Verse and the multiverse, you know, because it's not really a multiverse. It's more of like a timeline thing where like, and I think this is all trailer stuff, so I'm not, you know, spoiling anything, but the Flash goes back in time and he fucks with the time. So there are 2 timelines, and it turns out, and Michael Keaton's Batman does a great job of explaining this using spaghetti of all things, about how like the different timeline, about how time works, and when you change something, you can alter both the past and the present. But he goes back in time and he encounters himself as a teenager, and that fucks a whole bunch of stuff up. I wish that they had kept it a secret that Michael Keaton as Batman was in it, but they've been using that as a selling point. And I understand the reason they're doing that is because at this point, Michael Keaton is a more marketable star than Ezra Miller. I mean, let's face it, they're selling a movie. But the good news is there's way more cool surprises than Michael Keaton as Batman in this movie. The different timelines open up way more than just Michael Keaton as Batman. But that would have been a fun reveal if you didn't know it was coming. But again, they're selling a movie, so they had to get people in.
I do love the marketing strategy of refocusing away from Ezra, who's, a rough sell right now, to put it lightly, and refocusing on everyone else. So it's like Keaton, Supergirl, having the director more out there. And then when people interview Michael Shannon, because he's back as General Zod, he's just like, yeah, I felt nothing coming back as General Zod. I was like, you guys realize that he broke my neck in the last movie I was in, right? Like, it's just one of those. So of course, everyone's just taking his like thing out of context of like, I felt nothing coming back. And it's like, well, no, the context is he spent like 6 or 9 months for Man of Steel training, prepping, all that stuff. And with Flash, he was only there for a few weeks. But it's just funny that people are just leaning hard on the look at Michael Shannon being all cantankerous. And it's like, yeah, that's why we love Michael Shannon. Did you not see his Criterion's Closet episode? It's fucking amazing.
Yeah, he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt. It was amazing.
Oh, and it ends with him being like, oh, what a great day. I'm a lucky boy. In like the most monotone voice ever. It's amazing.
And does it set up like the new DC that they're going to do, like with James Gunn taking over and all that?
I'm not too familiar with what James Gunn is setting up, so it may be setting it up. I know that it is definitely heading in a different direction than previous DC movies, but I haven't really been a fan of most of the previous DC, especially the Superman Batman ones. I mean, I liked Aquaman and I liked the first Wonder Woman. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what he's been planning to set up, so I can't say how well it set that up.
Well, speaking of comics, I have another edition of Correia's Book Nook or Book Corner, whatever we're calling it. I don't know. DC actually recently came out with a new animated film called Batman: The Doom That Came to Gotham, which, if you don't know, it was an Elseworld title, meaning it's a contained story that is non-canon, takes place other universe. But it was basically Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy and many other amazing series, taking the Batman lore and filtering it through H.P. Lovecraft. And it's so good. The animated movie adapts the book almost exactly, minus like a few details, because it does take place in like early 1900s. And they add in a few things to kind of update it and modernize it. Like they add in Lucius Fox and have a moment of like addressing some Lovecraftian race issues with that. And a few other things, but the whole premise is basically tying like the Wayne's family to like Cthulhu and the Elder Gods, and like how they were all tied to that. The animated movie is pretty good, but I can't recommend the graphic novel enough. Mike Mignola's artwork is amazing, and it just the opening just reads like In the Mouth of Madness, but instead it's the Penguin going basically nuts in the Arctic, which is awesome. They do stuff like they turn Killer Croc into a Dagon, basically, and they have like Mr. Freeze be like a reanimated frozen corpse. It goes there. It's very dark. It's very colorful, and just all around awesome. And then because of that, I also got inspired to deep dive into Hellboy a lot. And if you haven't read any Hellboy, I can't recommend enough going by the omnibuses, where it's the collections, because when they collected them canonically. So if you read like from the first one, it starts with Seed of Destruction and moves forward. but also the short stories collections are really good. The first omnibus collects most of the Hellboy in Mexico story, which is awesome because it's like a young Hellboy and he's in Mexico and he's investigating a plague of monsters. There's witches, vampires, all this stuff, and he ends up teaming up with these 3 lucha wrestler brothers who gave up wrestling to fight monsters because they were called to it by God. And disaster happens, and there's a moment where Hellboy goes, "Yeah, after the incident with the brothers, I was in Mexico. They found me 5 months later outside of a bar, pissed drunk in Mexico." And they're like, "Well, what happened during those 5 months?" He's like, "I don't know. I was blackout drunk, and I don't know if I want to remember." And then the next few stories are what happened during that. So it's just Hellboy just just messing up. And what's great about the Hellboy comics is how often these incidents are resolved not because Hellboy outsmarted them, but just because something happened. Like there's a great issue where like Rasputin comes back and he's about to like take over the world, and then like a Nazi head in a jar just kind of fucks up the planet, blows up the entire base, and Hellboy's just like, well, I guess that's over with. And Rasputin gets called out like, "Oh, you got defeated by a head in a jar?" But the comics are weird. The artwork's amazing. And also if you get the omnibus of short stories, the first volume of it, it does include The Crooked Man, which is what the next Hellboy movie is going to be based on. And that is a dark and twisted Appalachian folk horror story that just goes so weird. I love it so much. So I can't recommend if you haven't deep dived into the Hellboy comics yet, highly recommend it. Most of them are available on the Libby app, so you can borrow them for free using your local library card.
Nice.
Another thing that I saw that I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's not really horror, but I think it's worth mentioning because people will be interested. I saw the new Indiana Jones movie.
Oh,
Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is what it's called. And it's an Indiana Jones movie. Is the best way to describe it. Yeah, it's Indiana Jones. He gets dragged back into things, and he's looking for basically Archimedes' dial. There's 2 halves to it, and his old buddy Baz had one. And Phoebe Waller-Bridge plays Baz's daughter, and she's looking for the other half for her doctoral thesis. So, but of course, there's a Nazi because there's always Nazis, who's played by Mads Mikkelsen.
How is my boy Mads?
Yeah. He's an amazing Nazi.
Of course. Well, Mads is amazing no matter what. But like, when they were like, "Oh yeah, there's a big bad Nazi in it, and it's played by Mads Mikkelsen." It's like, oh, he's gonna hit all those notes just right.
He does. And he wants the Archimedes dial because the Archimedes dial basically can turn back time is what it is. You can time travel. So he wants it for, it's set in, I think it's set in the 60s or 70s. I feel like Vietnam is coming to a close. So maybe it's the early 70s, but Indy is like he's retiring as a professor. So however old, so they don't, they de-age him for the opening scene because the opening scene takes place, in the 40s, end of World War II. But then he's not de-aged. So people who are wondering about the de-aging of Harrison Ford, it's only before the opening credits. But it's fun. I mean, it's long. It's 2.5 hours and it feels long. So I'm not saying it's boring, but it's not a quick watch. There's a lot that happens, and it's pretty exciting actually. There's a lot of good stunt work in it. There's a lot of good chases, and it's an Indiana Jones movie.
I'm just excited for the banter between Indy and Phoebe Waller-Bridge because she's incredible and she's so smart and quick-witted. Like,
there's a dynamic between those two because they both want the same thing, but for different reasons. Same thing as the Nazi. Everybody wants the dial, but everybody wants it for different reasons. So they're kind of on the same team, but then they butt heads on things. So I think you'll be happy with the dynamic between them because, like you said, she's incredible and Harrison Ford is incredible. So yeah, it's
she's so good and like if she got a crack at like writing some of that dialogue, it's good. Like you could tell when her voice was like very prominent in No Time to Die, the last James Bond movie, because there were some scenes where I was like, oh, Phoebe Waller-Bridge wrote this. Like her language is all over this scene, which is awesome. But yeah, I'm always stoked for Indiana Jones. Even like
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah, even that one, like it's not as bad as we all made it out when it came out.
I haven't seen it in such a long time. I think I might need to revisit it. But from what I remember, this one is definitely better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as good as the original 3, though. So if we were ranking them, it would be number 4 out of the 5. That says more about the original 3, though, than it does this movie. I think.
I don't think you could ever top Last Crusade. Like, Last Crusade is just the best out there. Don't get me wrong. Raiders of the Lost Ark, very close second when it comes to my rankings, but Last Crusade, just Sean Connery and Harrison Ford had such great chemistry. They were so good together.
And another kind of fringe thing I saw, which I know both of you did too. So let's talk about Asteroid City.
Yeah.
Asteroid City, it's the new Wes Anderson movie, and it's not even close to horror, but it is kind of a little throwback to like 50s sci-fi, and there's an alien in it.
Oh,
it is confirmed.
Incredible.
The sequence is outstanding.
It's amazing because one of the main, actually the closest thing to a main character it has, because it's mainly an ensemble, but the closest thing to a main character it has Jason Schwartzman. He's a photographer, and when the alien comes out there, he's taking a picture of it and it poses for him, which is hilarious. And the alien, I don't want to spoil anything, but it has an amazing payoff. It has an amazing payoff.
Yeah, and also the way they bring the alien into the picture, like, again, don't want to spoil it, but they do it with kind of a special effect way that it does stand out and look alien from the rest of the cast.
Yeah, because the whole thing seems like it takes place back in like the 50s.
Yeah, it is. They say it's like 1955.
And the whole thing, it's kind of set around it's a play that you're watching, because every once in a while Bryan Cranston will pop in as a narrator, and then he'll introduce Edward Norton, who's the writer of the play. And whenever it goes to black and white, you know that you're watching the behind the scenes of the play. And that's kind of why the entire aesthetic of it, I mean, it's got that Wes Anderson color palette, but it also has kind of a two-dimensional, the sets kind of have a two-dimensional feel to them, because you're supposed to be watching a play unfold. So the backgrounds aren't like super deep and rich, it's.
Yeah, there's like limited locations, and yeah, they sometimes do kind of flat backdrops. So it looks like, yeah, it's like the back of the stage, and like there's effects like whenever an atom bomb goes off, it looks like it's kind of painted on the screen.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm a little confused because I'll be honest, I haven't really watched a Wes Anderson movie since I think Moonrise Kingdom. And I certainly haven't seen one in theater since Fantastic Mr. Fox, but I loved it. I had so much fun with Asteroid City. I thought it was absolutely hilarious. I loved the framing with it being a play and like bounce back and forth. So it was like, not only do you have the story of Asteroid City going on, but there was like the conversations of the creative process and like finding the character, finding the story, the writers, working things out. There's a lot of layers to it, but I'm seeing a lot of people like shitting on it or saying like, oh, the Wes Anderson thing's over. And then I even saw like a really fucking bad take where someone was like, oh, Wes Anderson, imagine being Wes Anderson and spending decades developing your aesthetic and then just seeing a bunch of people on TikTok copy it, making you obsolete. And it's like, that's not making you obsolete. That's you created this thing. That's like saying, oh, I bet John Carpenter felt like shit after all these slasher movies came out that were also really good after Halloween. It's like, no, dude, that's just how it is. Like, there's always going to be mimics. There's always going to be ways to copy people. How many, people try? It's just ridiculous to think that one person's art invalidates somebody else's just because they can emulate their aesthetic,
I'm kind of hit or miss with Wes Anderson myself. I do find his later work is stronger. This Asteroid City is my second favorite Wes Anderson movie, I think, behind Isle of Dogs. But I do think that it's sometimes it flip flops with Moonrise Kingdom, because that's another one of my favorites. But I'm not a big fan of like his earlier stuff. But I don't understand people saying, "Oh, it's over." No, he's just getting better, I think.
Yeah, and I was going to say one of the best takes I've seen was from a friend who saw Asteroid City and said the movie proved that AI cannot replicate art because only somebody like Wes Anderson could make Asteroid City as a Wes Anderson movie. Just because it is his own style, but at the same time, it's like these imitators and this stuff with like AI. It's like it's very how do I put this? False. It's like it's got like the false aesthetic, but it doesn't capture the heart. And yeah, no, just like Asteroid City does have his style, but at the same time, it also has his very particular sense of writing and themes. So yeah, no, just I think it really stands out.
It's like anything with AI, it's taking reference.
Yeah.
God damn it. Have I been mentioning Star Trek a lot lately? Because I've been watching a lot of Star Trek. So my apologies if I keep mentioning Star Trek on this podcast, which, oh my God, Strange New Worlds. Carol Kane's in it now. Oh, it's so good. Anyways, but no, in Star Trek Next Generation, there's a lot of stuff with Data and how Data has all this information in his brain. And when he tries to do creative stuff, he can only reference or emulate other people doing things. So when he's playing violin, yes, it's very good because he's playing like a certain player can like he could emulate Yo-Yo Ma or someone, but he can't get the heart of what's going on. And I think that's just like a perfect example when it comes to AI writing or AI art. All of this is it's always going to be an amalgamation. That's a word I'm gonna not say right. An amalgamation of other people's work. But I think it was also one of the WGA picket signs said AI doesn't have childhood trauma, and that's the thing is it doesn't know from its own personal experience. It doesn't know from its own personal events and things to pull from to self-reference to make it unique. And I think that's why, even though you have all this emulation, which I'm sure it's not taking away from the original, the person that inspired its thing, it's either, something that's done out of admiration or, fun, or you're just trying to knock it off, I mean, Friday the 13th doesn't take away from Halloween, and Halloween doesn't take away from the proto slashers before it, it's building upon it for as long as you're bringing something new while emulating,
That's one of the things that bothers me about people when remakes come out. People say like, oh, like when the Child's Play remake came out a few years ago, people, oh, this is ruining my childhood. How? This movie is not making the one from your childhood cease to exist. It's an additional movie. If you're that pissed off, don't see it. But how is it ruining your childhood? I mean,
people need to calm down. Anyways,
we could go on.
The only horror thing that I know that I have seen this week, really, new release, is one that we've saved for the end because it's going to kind of mesh into our topic. But The Blackening.
Yes.
You guys see The Blackening? You see it, Correia?
Oh,
I haven't seen it yet.
We'll try not to spoil it then.
When that first trailer came out, I was like, I need to see this movie. And I was not disappointed. Well, it's Tim Story who did the original Barbershop, and he also did the two Fantastic Four movies, which we don't talk about. But The Blackening's great. It's about a group of friends who gather in a cabin-esque house in the woods for a Juneteenth party. And,
it's a group of black friends that gather.
Yeah, for Juneteenth.
That's important.
Yeah. And they find this what did they get calling it? Jim Crow Monopoly board game?
It's this weird board game in the basement that's called The Blackening.
Yeah.
But it kind of they call it like a Jim Crow Monopoly because in the middle of the board there's this talking Sambo head with a timer around it. And it's pretty freaking racist, the Sambo head. But then the game is like you pick a card and it and it'll ask like name one horror movie where the black character survives or something like that, and then you have time to answer it. And the whole crux of the movie is that there's someone watching them who is forcing them to play this game, and if they get any wrong answers, bad things happen.
They die. So,
yeah,
and a lot of the questions are based around like it becomes a questioning of like, how black are you, and it's playing with the idea and trope and culture of revoking one's black card. Oh no, you put grapes in the potato salad. Hey.
At one point, when describing the game, one of the characters says, "Oh, I'm not going to take a Black history test," because that's what it is. It's not just the first question happens to be, the black characters surviving a horror movie. But the other ones, they have to do with like black culture. Like one of the funniest questions is, what was it? Name the 6 black actors who have been on Friends.
Yeah, and. Oh, dude, it's such a great bit because all of them are immediately say, well, I don't watch Friends, but there was that one episode where
Aisha was on one episode, and
I don't watch Friends, but there was that one episode, and they ended up naming all of them, and then the board goes, wrong. The correct answer is, I don't know. I watch Living Single, which is my response to anytime someone brings up Friends.
My issue with that sequence is because the correct answer is, I don't know. I don't watch Friends. Every one of them said that, so they got it right.
No, the correct answer is, I don't know. I don't watch that. I watch Living Single. They didn't. They
left out the Living Single part. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. No, my favorite was the board goes. Everyone knows the Black national anthem is "Raise Your Voices Up," and everyone knows the first verse. But what's the second verse?
Yeah.
First of all, this is a movie you see with a crowd, and you got to see with a crowd that's into it, which our crowd was.
That's the kind of audience you should see this movie with.
I mean, just for my audience, just for that one bit of the sing the second verse, you could hear everyone just suddenly go, oh, and like you could hear the gears turning in everyone's head going, fuck, what is the second verse of Raise Your Voices Up? And oh man, but yeah, Blackening is really good. It's not a parody. I know a lot of the marketing makes it look like it's going to be a parody. There was one character that was very cartoonish, and that's Clifton, the nerdy type character, which he was the only character that I was like, this one he feels too cartoonish for it, but it's a lot of fun. It plays with a lot of the tropes.
But it also subverts them.
Yeah.
Which is part of what I thought was fun about it is like, yeah, it embraces the black people in horror tropes, but it also subverts them. And also, we were talking about this earlier before we rolled. I think this concept of the game and people playing the game to live would have worked well with a white cast as well. I mean, obviously not with the black history questions, but I feel like what they were going out to do, which was to basically make a movie that both embraced and subverted the black stereotypes, the concept behind it would have worked just as well with any other cast. So it's not like they made a movie that panders to the black stereotypes. They made a movie that they made a creative horror movie that just they were happen to be able to throw this stuff into, and I think it works.
Well, I'll give you that the basic horror concept of it, of the friends in a cabin finding a board game, being forced to it by a bunch of killers doing it, that concept very much so could be used with different casts, but the way the characters interact, the talk, everything with it that's what really separates and makes it so special and so awesome, because that's how a lot of my friends in the culture talk, which is absolutely hilarious. And they do a really good job in that it plays with tropes. It's very meta, but it doesn't do the meta thing where suddenly the pacing and everything stops for them to point out the meta bits. There's no scene of them sitting down. Well, in a horror movie, they do this. It's just quick reactionary, like, why are you doing that? Don't say it. We should, when she's like almost puking at the idea of them splitting up, and she's like, no, don't do it. It's all quick. It feels natural. It's just them calling each other out, going and throwing out quick references. And I really respect that. It does. I didn't really like the ending a whole lot. I thought it was a little forced, but it still plays back to a lot of like the slasher tropes of the 80s, which I did like.
Speaking of the slasher tropes of the 80s, and the thing is, there's a different kind of group of people because you pretty much had the stereotypes in with the group, but the stereotypes are different because of who they are. Like one is the ex-gangbanger, one is the couple who are bad for each other and they keep getting splitting up and getting back together. There's the homosexual black guy. I mean, they're different. You don't just have the virgin, the slut, the jock, the brain, and the stoner. Like you would have had in Scooby-Doo or Cabin in the Woods or whatever. You have your own different stereotypes for the group, which I think worked well as well.
And I think that's because they made the simple decision of having this take place. I think it's their 10-year anniversary of graduating from college. So all these characters were those stereotypes back in college. You did have the jock, you did have the party girl, you did have the token gay friend, but now they're all grown up, or at least 10 years older. And some of them got wiser, some of them didn't, some of them are just like one moment away from like falling back on those tendencies, which really helps like round out and ground those characters. And except again for Clifton. Again, that was the one character I was like, not a fan. But again, lots of fun, very funny. Again, can't recommend seeing it with a crowd enough.
Absolutely see it with a crowd. That kind of goes for all like slasher kind of movies, I think, but this one especially, which will bring us to our topic, which is going to be meta movies, which I'm not sure how meta The Blackening is, because like you said, they don't actually stop the action to say, this is what they do with you. It's not super self-referential. I think it embraces the stereotypes and tropes enough so that you can make an argument for it being meta. But I like you said, it's not a parody at all. It's not like Scary Movie where you just everything is like, trope, beat you over the head until it's just absurd. It's definitely more of a horror movie than a comedy, even though it is hysterical.
And I think that's why it works so well, is that at its core, it is a horror movie. It just is really funny, and so many crossbows. What
are some other meta movies? We were talking a little bit about Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
Cabin in the Woods is one of those where like the characters don't realize they're in a movie, but not only the audience, but, the people watching them. I mean, it's basically a horror movie. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like how in the Cabin in the Woods, it's basically the perspective of the characters in the movie. And like the whole mission control thing is basically the directors and writers in production of making the horror movie. So it is kind of meta in that way. Plus, they do talk about the rules. Like they even have like an aside where like, they have the Harbinger character warns them that they're going to die there and they go for it anyway. It's like, it's all part of the ritual. Like they have to do it to appease the gods, like the audience. And just they do kind of lay into that and set things up in certain ways associated with the tropes. It's like the movie itself, it's the Cabin in the Woods, and there are so many movies that are just about cabins in the woods.
I mean, you can't talk about meta movies without bringing up the Scream franchise,
of course.
Absolutely.
The ones that popularized it. They weren't the first, but they popularized it.
They streamlined it.
Yeah. Especially since, there were horror movies that would poke fun at a lot of the tropes. I mean, even in like the early days of slasher films, you had the Slumber Party Massacre movies, which were poking fun at it so much that a lot of audience didn't catch on to it and just thought it was a shitty slasher film, not realizing that it was a feminist take, just like shitting on it, which is so good.
That shows you how embracing those stereotypes the original slasher movies were. That when they did a feminist take making fun of it, everyone's like, oh yeah, this new great slasher.
Well, it also helps that they like absolutely went like hard on it, like, oh yeah, we're gonna have them all in like they're high school girls having a sleepover, so let's put them in sexy lingerie and like really male gaze the shit out of this. And the killer has a drill and it's pretty phallic on its own, but we're gonna really make it phallic.
And then how they defeat him without spoiling anything is how feminists should deal with phallic invaders.
If you haven't watched all the Slumber Party Massacre movies, I'm telling you, you're missing out on some of the most fun.
Yeah, all of them are good. Like 1 through 3 and the remake, all bangers.
And we've talked them up enough that people, if you should have all seen them by now. If you haven't, pause us and go watch at least the first.
Exactly.
Another one I got to mention is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Almost kind of all found footage, quote, in quote, movies can kind of be seen as meta. But what makes Behind the Mask, what makes it more meta than the others is how it kind of takes that right turn at about, at the third act.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but they fully embrace like the Susan Sontag mentality of slashers and going into the metaphorical senses of it and like fully spelling it out, because he's a slasher in training. He's coming up. He wants to be the next Freddy and Jason, and they treat him like they're real world serial killers. And he's like, oh yeah, when you go in the closet, you're protecting there. You know why? It's representative of the vagina. Just like going hard and explaining it. And I just love how that movie fully understands that there's a certain point when shit's going down that you put the fucking camera down, that you let the camera go. I respect the shit out of Behind the Mask for that there's just a moment where they go, you know what, documentary's over, and they put it down and then it goes cinematic. And it's like, yes, thank you. For
the other thing is that it's like, the first part is, it doesn't even really feel like found footage. It feels more like a mockumentary, because they're just following Leslie as he gets ready for his big debut and like going through his sessions and training, because like they have I love that he has a whole thing like he has to have really good cardio in order to catch up to all those teenagers.
It's so hard because they're sprinting and you got to make it look like you're just walking. Such a great bit.
Yeah, I feel like Behind the Mask is particularly underrated, even though it does this solid breakdown, especially at the time of the mid 2000s of slasher movies and kind of where horror was at that time. And he's just a fun character, he's because that's the thing I love in the mockumentary. Leslie is very cordial. He's very talkative. He doesn't feel like a threat until he does become a threat. And
you see the characters in the movie that are filming him have that debate because they're all chummy with him. And then he's like, all right, guys, tonight's tonight. I'm going to go do it. If you try to stop me, I will kill you. And then he just like runs off and they're like, holy shit, are we actually going to, like, you see like all of a sudden the veil drop and them go, oh my God, he's actually doing this. He's actually going to go murder these people. Are we going to just like let this happen? And that's when the cameras get, Behind the Mask is real good. I love a good meta movie when it's done right and when it's evident. But do you guys find that, especially in the last, since 2000, there's moments where a horror movie suddenly goes meta, but not fully. Like it just has like a moment where it's just like of self-awareness, just like, why? Like and I mean like the type of throwaway lines where it's like, well, in a horror movie, they would do this. Or, oh, we're not doing that. I learned that, and it's just like, why? Like, I get maybe
that's not a 2000s thing, because I think Friday the 13th Part 6 did that when she's like, oh, because I've seen enough horror movies, that a weirdo in a mask is a bad sign or what,
Which like I get like that, but there's just sometimes like a moment where it almost does a Scream, because I love the Scream movies, but we have to admit that at a certain point, everyone's sitting down and breaking down the rules of a slasher film, especially when it's like that, when there's specific where it felt like the action kind of stopped, especially in the second one where it's like we're in a sequel, and then you get to the third one, it's like, no, this is a trilogy. We're in a trilogy now, and there's like a certain point where it's like, all right, you're kind of stopping the pacing a bit just to like explain to us how smart your character is, because they're aware. And I don't know, that kind of almost fourth wall breaking, it kind of ruins the pacing at times sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do with the film,
Sometimes it can be used like the meta-ness, like in Urban Legend.
Oh yeah.
It always, the final scene in Urban Legend always bothered me, because the killer, she goes and explains, I just spoiled that it's a woman that does the killing in Urban Legend, but she goes and she explains, she's all, so what we have here, and she explains the legend that she's going to be killing. It's like, oh, come on, you're not a Bond villain. Let us figure this one out. I mean, so I guess, yeah, it's kind of more of a over explaining is what you're kind of getting.
Yeah,
at.
an urban legend is kind of a meta slasher in the way that, it is a post-Scream slasher that just kind of did the same thing for slashers, but with like urban legends.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think that almost all, the only way you can do phenomenons like zombies or vampires are so embedded in the pop culture now that the only way you can do those movies now is to do them meta. Like, because everybody knows the rules with zombies and vampires. So like Shaun of the Dead, granted, that's like a parody of like, Dawn of the Dead, but everybody knows how to deal with it. So it becomes kind of meta in that the rules are understood, and the same thing with like new vampire movies. You're like, okay, yeah, we need a stake. We need, and thankfully it hasn't gotten that way with werewolves yet.
I mean, in some ways, there's definitely movies where there's like bits of awareness, like Lost Boys hits upon those notes where it's like, oh, well, vampire lore exists and, garlic and, they subvert some things. But I mean,
Fright Night. Fright Night did similar. They even had like an actor from a vampire movie to Peter Vincent, to come in to try and fight the vampire.
Yeah. And in those moments, it works.
One of the things I loved about Renfield so much is like my favorite part of Renfield is when Dracula is in his apartment. Then he looks down at the welcome mat and it's like, oh, welcome, come on in. It doesn't beat you over the head with the fact that a vampire's got to be invited in. It just does that one little shot. And then Renfield's reaction, you're like, oh yeah, no, that's a great way to do that. It reminds you if you knew it.
And I think that's what sets apart like good meta moments from bad, because like Scream can get away with it because it's Scream. We live for we know the big reveal is coming. We know the killers are going to over explain why their motives and stuff, and we live for it. And I think that's one of the strengths of Renfield was that it had these moments of like where they explained like. I just recently watched Renfield, so I really appreciated the fact that it wasn't Dracula trying to make a bunch of vampires because he's such a selfish narcissist that he just wanted a bunch of Renfields. That was great, but also just the little things of just like the little tropes like Renfield was always eating bugs. Why? Go because he was crazy. It's like no, it's because he's got these powers and he's getting the life form like a vampire does, but because he's not a vampire, he doesn't drink blood. He just takes the life from bugs. But it's just such a quick, like, yeah, I get my power for bugs. Moving on. And it's just, and I thought that was great because you don't need to stop the action. You don't need to pause all the time to fully explain everything, especially when your audience is already decently educated and stuff that's like so ingrained in the society or into the zeitgeist, I should say. And yeah, this isn't me. Please, no one take this as me shitting on Scream because I fucking love those movies, but it is just one of those things where it's when it comes out of nowhere, where the movie wasn't meta at all for like the first hour, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm meta now for a moment, and then like just keeps going on. It's like, wait, what the fuck just happened?
Are you talking about There's Nothing Out There when the guy uses the boom mic to escape from the monster?
I mean, I love that bit. And actually, I was going to bring up There's Nothing Out There because I think it is a pretty fun meta horror movie. And it was well before a lot of other meta horror movies because it's basically about, it's kind of a cabin in the woods thing where all these friends go to the cabin in the woods. And there's this one guy who watches a lot of horror movies and he's just like, oh man, I got a bad feeling about this. This reminds me of a horror movie. And although it's not a slasher movie, or at least it's not like a slasher killer that they encounter, it's like this weird, like octopus alien creature that starts attacking them. And it's got these weird powers and stuff. And there's a lot of shenanigans with some of the tropes, like one of their friends leaves and says they'll be right back. And then later they ask like what happened to them. And the meta guy's just like, oh, I wrote them off hours ago. They're probably dead. So it's fun. It's fun.
The boom mic scene. This is how ahead of its time it was. When I was first watching that, I was in a big group of friends, and when that scene came in, we're like, "Oh, hey, the boom is in the shot. The boom is in the shot." And then he grabs it and uses it to swim away. We didn't even realize it was part of the plot until we thought that there was a legit production mistake.
Oh yeah, no, it's fun. It has a lot going for it, and even the opening, there's this like action prologue where it's set in a video store, and like this killer attacks this video store clerk girl, and all the horror movies in the video aisle start falling down and hitting her. Yeah, so it just kind of really leans into that. Although back on Jonathan's example, or what he was talking about with this kind of weird one-off meta moments, I was just thinking about Seed of Chucky kind of does that, where it's not really a meta movie, but at the same time they do have those moments where they kind of reflect on the tropes and cliches because it's a Hollywood movie. Oh god, it's like a Hollywood movie about Chucky, and Jennifer Tilly's character Tiffany comes to life, and they actually have Jennifer Tilly as herself. And yeah, they're making a movie called Chucky Goes Psycho, and Chucky and Tiffany come to life because of their child, and they do kind of reflect on some of the cliches and stuff, but not enough where it's like the whole movie's meta. So it is kind of weird in that regard.
Yeah. Does that take you guys out a bit and it's not just horror. It could be either when a character is too aware that they're in a movie.
I mean,
I think it depends on the context, I guess.
Yeah.
It depends on how well it's done.
Yeah.
Like, one thing, and I know we all love this movie, so it bothers me that this is in it, but the scene in Funny Games where the guy rewinds it, that takes me out of it.
Yeah.
I do think that was Michael Haneke's point. I think that his point was to kind of take you out of it for a second, so I guess mission accomplished. But yeah, that whole part is like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think when it comes down to it, it depends, because there's definitely like movies like the 21 Jump Street movies where, they shout it, hey, this is the trope in the action movies. But like, I just hope that if you're going to do that with your movie, just don't mess with the pacing with it. And I think that's why like Shaun of the Dead works so well. Like they're aware of it. They've seen the movies, but they're not aware that they're in a movie, right? And I think that's where the meta-ness, the line between a good meta movie and a bad one is these characters can be aware that these movies, that these tropes, that these stories and things exist, but once they know that they're in a movie, that's when it, there's a certain type amount of dialogue where it's just like, okay, you're in a movie and you're over explaining, and you should never over explain when it comes to a movie, especially in such a visual art form, And yeah, that's why I think Shaun of the Dead and The Blackening work so well, is because they're aware of the tropes, they're aware of these things, but at no point do they go, oh, we're in a horror movie right now. It's just hey, don't do that stupid thing that stupid people do in horror movies, and then move on,
What about movies that they're not, I guess they could be considered, maybe what I'm talking about is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Okay. Where it's basically a movie about the cast of Nightmare on Elm Street,
Oh yeah.
That one, they're not aware that they're in a movie, but they're playing themselves who used to be in this series, and the villain of the movie they were in is coming after them, that kind of thing. Would that be considered meta, or would that just be considered self-referential?
I would consider it meta. I mean, this was kind of the setup leading to Scream, or at least without New Nightmare, we wouldn't have gotten Scream, which reflects more on kind of the tropes and cliches of the slasher franchise. But I'd say, yeah, it would be considered meta and self-referential, because both kind of lean into the other in this particular case. They don't really discuss the tropes as much, but they do talk a lot about Freddy and the kind of ways the movie goes. There's also moments where the movie bleeds into reality, so they start acting more like their characters, like Heather Langenkamp saying she's acting more like Nancy, and like she has that conversation with John Saxon, and she notices that he's saying dialogue from the movie without him realizing he's saying dialogue from the movie.
Yeah.
Now, one more. Since Correia is able to talk about Star Trek all the time, I'm going to talk about Book of Shadows again.
I thought you were going to bring up Galaxy Quest for a moment.
No. Do you guys think Book of Shadows is, because Book of Shadows is more of a sequel to the hype surrounding the Blair Witch Project than it is a sequel to the Blair Witch Project, and all the characters are completely aware of the events of the first movie, even though they're they're aware of the mythology and they're aware of the first movie. The first movie exists in their universe.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. And honestly, I feel that's the main takeaway from Book of Shadows, and they should have leaned into that more. And, you know, it was a lot of what they were going for before the studio edited it around to be more of a typical horror movie, because they had the great idea of like, you know, we're going to do a sequel, but why just make another, you know, found footage thing? I mean, they already nailed that so perfectly in the first movie. We got to go about this completely differently. So they decided to do, this kind of meta thing where it's just more about the fandom and the reaction and hype after the release of the Blair Witch Project. So it's following a bunch of Blair Witch Project fans and people who think it's real, and like the goth girl and the Wiccan girl and all that. And just kind of, it's more dealing with the aftermath of the Blair Witch Project and the lore. And they go into a lot of it as it affects them in real life. So, I would consider it to be a meta movie, and especially in that regard.
And a successful one with it for the most part. I like that idea that they're not just going to do another group of people get lost in the woods and encounter the Blair Witch. Like they tried, making that commentary on the hype on it and all that. And another franchise that does that too is Human Centipede. Because Human Centipede
Yes.
2, they
Yeah.
have the whole plot where it's someone who is so obsessed with the first movie, tries to do it in real life, but he's obviously not a surgeon. He's just a psychopath. Which they drive that point very, very hard. Human Centipede 2 is the crown jewel of that franchise, to be honest. And because it's just so gross and so they go so hard for it. Because like the first one is just like 3 people and they're human centipeded. Yeah, I think that's how you can use it as a verb. And it's fine. After the initial shock, it's just like, oh, okay, now they're crawling around for a bit. But with Human Centipede 2, it's just like this dude doing a botched surgery on like 12 people, I think it is, or something like that.
Yeah, and he's making a loop.
Yeah, and he's trying to loop it. I don't know. I never saw the third one.
The third one is about a prison, and they're trying to put all the convicts into one huge chain.
Oh God.
But like, I think that there's a reason why I haven't watched the third one. But the second one I thought was also really good, because that one, much like Blair Witch 2, was kind of commenting on not just the hype around the first one, because I was definitely one of those people before the first one came out going, guys, they made a horror movie out of ass to mouth. Guys, they made a horror movie out of ass to mouth.
No.
But like, and it wasn't just the hype, but also the controversy, because there were so many people, the typical narrative of like, oh, this thing is depicted in a movie or video game, and so people are going to try to emulate. It's like, cool, I'm going to do that. I'm going to create the most disgusting person possible and have them try to do Human Centipede, quote, in real life because of the movie. And so it was not subtle at all. I think you can't use that word at all when describing Human Centipede movies.
I feel meta horror has always existed alongside with the genre in a reaction to the genre, and it will continue to exist. So it's just, fun to see the different ways that it'll be tackled, especially as the genre continues to shift and change and get weirder.
I just hope that it continues to get smarter as well, because
that too.
Because, as long as they find clever ways to do it, then I'm all for it. I love I love those aha moments. That that when you see someone realize something and it gets meta, you're like, oh yes, I'm like Rick Dalton in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, pointing at the screen.
I get that reference. Well, even going back to the old Abbott and Costello movies, like those got meta at times with those too. So when something goes on long enough, there's going to be someone that goes, all right, cool, let's poke fun at it, or let's call it out, or let's try to do a fresh take with it. And I think as long as, again, you don't sacrifice the action, you don't sacrifice the pacing for it, I think, and it makes sense, overall, why not? But also, fuck it, why not pull funny games and just throw it in there just to throw people off? Who am I to say? I'm nobody.
And why not give a group of people watching the stuff unfold like in Rubber. Put a bunch of people on the hill watching the movie unfold in real life.
I love Rubber. Just
I do
in that
too.
it was like a meta movie of movies that don't exist, which is Killer Tire movies. It's great.
Yep. All right, let's call this one an episode. So, what are your favorite meta movies? What did we miss? And what did we talk about that you don't think is meta? What is meta that we didn't talk about? Let us all know. Reach out. Our theme song is by Restless Spirit, so go give them a listen. Our artwork is by Chris Fisher, so go give him a like. And you can find us on any of the socials under iHorror or at iHorror.com, which is the site that we all call home. And let us know what you think of meta movies. Are they too meta? I don't know.
Are you going to do a podcast episode that's meta about our meta episode?
Maybe we need to do a mini-sode that metas are full-sode. Isn't that all podcasts are, breaking the fourth wall? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, let us know what you think, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. So for me, James J. Edwards.
I'm Jacob Davison.
And I'm Jonathan Correia.
Keep your eye on horror.